Applying to university is probably one of the most stressful things in your career. You could be totally overwhelmed by all the information that's out there, and maybe you're stressed out about your grades or you don't know which university is right for you.
It's not too bad. I mean, it should be okay. I'm not too worried about it, really. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried at all.
So today we're going to start tackling some of these issues.
We've got 8 tips which we wish we had known before applying to university.
Hi everyone, my name is Jena Meinecke and I'm a plasma physicist. But I actually started at community college. I went to Moorpark Community College in California, and then I transferred to UCLA to get a major in physics and then a minor in mathematics.
And my name's Archie Bott. As of yesterday, I'm a doctor in plasma physics, and I studied mathematics at Cambridge University in the UK for 3 years.
So our first piece of advice is that grades actually do matter when you're applying to an undergraduate program. I hate to say it, it sucks, it's not fair, but it does matter.
So let's start with the UK. To get into a university in the UK, you need to do well in 3 types of exams: GCSEs, AS levels, and A levels. And it's really, you might ask, well, which of these matter most? And what I would say to that is I view all of these exams as stepping stones onto getting into a good university. In the moment you're there, it really matters that you do well in your GCSEs and your AS levels and your A levels. And so you should just focus on each exam as it comes, and that will allow you to build on your success and eventually get to the university you want to get to. Another thing in terms of getting into a university that you want is to look on their websites. Often UK universities will say what typical offers, A-level offers and AS level offers will look like, and what types of subjects people have done. And I found it really helpful to know what I was aiming for, to have a target and know that if I get those grades, I will get to the university I want to.
Now let's talk about the United States. What you want to be focusing on is your GPA from your high school classes, but also your SAT scores. And so I have 5 pieces of advice to give you here to optimize those. The first is to start early. For me, for instance, they were looking back at my middle school grades. So you want to really be thinking about your grades as early as 8th grade.
You know what this half-baked plan of yours sounds like to me? Child endangerment.
The second piece of advice I would give you here is to start thinking about taking a rigorous course load. So you might be thinking, well, I take pretty standard classes. That's fine, but make sure you're taking the hardest classes for you. For me in particular, it meant that I took a full AP load, but I also did the International Baccalaureate program.
Child endangerment.
The third piece of advice I would give here is to also study really hard for your exams. We have a separate video on study tips for physics exams, but to be honest, most of the study tips can be applied to any subject. And then the fourth piece of advice here is to really practice for the SATs. Remember, the SATs are not necessarily a great indicator of how intelligent you are, but they are an indicator of how well you have studied for that exam. So that might mean having to get flashcards for it or having to take an SAT prep course. And the last piece of advice that I want to give here is that not all universities provide interviews for undergraduate programs. In fact, very few do. So that means that you are being reduced down to the numbers, your GPA and SAT score, but then also your recommendations and letter of intent. So you really need to be thinking about how you look on paper.
So our second piece of advice is to do your research. Really look up the universities you're considering applying to. It's also very important to look at subject-specific rankings as opposed to just the general university, just because, particularly if you want to continue to follow a career in science, it's not always about just the big name of the college, but also about the people you know and you meet within those universities. Another thing which it's really important to think about is to look at the location of the university, in the sense that some universities may be located in very big, expensive cities, and so actually the financial outlay associated with those universities is really significant. And that's aside from the fees of whether it's public versus a private university or a community college. For example, UCLA is a public school, but it's located in a very expensive place, which means it can be quite inaccessible for some people depending on their background.
Our third piece of advice is specifically for American students. And this is the best piece of advice I could possibly give you. You are probably not going to get this advice anywhere else. Go to community college. So I'm going to give you 5 quick reasons why you should consider going to community college. And the first is the most obvious. It's cheap. Back in 2005, to date myself, when I was taking classes, it was about $10 a unit, which meant that a normal class was about 3 units. I spent about $30 per class. That's a lot cheaper than going to an Ivy League university. And that leads me into my second reason, which is that often when you apply to university, you're not exactly sure that that is the career path that you want to go down. Let's be honest, if you're a teenager, you do not necessarily know what you want to do with the rest of your life, and you shouldn't have to.
It's like all of my life, everyone has always told me, you're a shoe. You're a shoe, you're a shoe, you're a shoe. And then today I just stopped and I said, what if I don't want to be a shoe? What if I want to be a purse, you know, or a pet?
You should always be changing your mind based on what feels right at the time and following your passion and drive. And that changes. So give yourself a break. By going to community college, you can spend the first few years dabbling in a lot of different topics for dirt cheap, and you can find out what's right for you. So if you think, for instance, you want to go into chemistry, and then you start taking chemistry classes and you realize, actually, I'm really more of a mathematician, then you can go in that direction, and you haven't wasted tens of thousands of dollars on a very expensive Ivy League education. So that leads me into the third reason why you should consider going to community college. It is a lot easier to transfer to the university of your choice. So if you go to community college, your first 2 years are all of the lower division classes. Those are all the basic classes you have to take at every university regardless. So you're gonna have to take humanities, you're gonna have to take some science, you're gonna have to take some whatever, politics class. Those are all the same. And so you might as well get them done cheap at a community college and then transfer for your upper division classes to the university of your choice. It's easier to get in because you have 2 years of evidence that you have done college courses and presumably done them very well. So that is an easier way of getting into your college of choice. And that leads me on to the fourth reason, which is that often when you apply as a transfer student, they're going to be looking at your community college grades more so than anything else. So if your grades were really bad in high school or your SAT scores were really bad, it's okay. You can still get into the university of your choice. For instance, for me, I took the SAT one time. I did not have the money or resources to get any kind of training or preparation for it. I just showed up one day with a number 2 pencil and took the exam, and I did not do well, which meant that a lot of universities that I felt I deserved to go to wouldn't even look at my application because my scores weren't good enough. So if you want to bypass bad high school grades and SAT scores, this is the route for you.
Evasive maneuvers, yeah.
And that leads me on to the fifth and probably most important reason to go to community college, which is that you might be close to your support network. Now I know you're probably 18, 17, and you're thinking, I don't want to be at home anymore. I'm so sick of my family. I'm sick of my parents. They're always bugging me for this and that. And I felt the exact same way. I was so sick of my family when I was a teenager. The last thing I wanted was to stay at home any longer. And at the time, I saw that as a huge disadvantage. But looking back retrospectively, it was really useful that I was close to my family during that time because, for instance, I could have my mom do my laundry and I could be there with my family for that moral support when things got hard.
So our fourth piece of advice is to make a sensible spread of applications, but remember to back yourself. So we're going to talk about the UK and the US separately because the systems are slightly different. In the UK, you apply to university through the UCAS system and you can make up to 5 applications. And my advice is to use those applications wisely. Use all 5 of them. In particular, use 3 for universities which you have a good set of grades for, which are a good fit. And you will know that from the advice from our previous tips. And also to use your 4th application to go to a safer choice, just in case you have a bit of bad luck. And then the 5th choice, be a bit ambitious. Choose something, really go for it. And apart from anything else, it's really important to note that, and this is what I meant by saying back yourself, is that if you have the grades to get into a place, you have a fair chance in the UK. Sometimes there are these perceptions that you have to be a certain type of person to go to a really top university. And the point is that if you have those grades, that place is for you. And it's also important to note that the very top universities, like Oxford, for example, will take into account your context And if you, for example, go to a school where there aren't many students who are sent to Russell Group universities or Oxford or Cambridge, that will be taken into account. And I can personally say that there is a lot of the admissions people in Oxford and other universities are passionate that it shouldn't matter where you come from as to whether you get to these amazing universities. So don't be put off by any reputation or media perception. Just go for it if you've got the grades.
Now on to the United States. Here it is all about quality applications, not necessarily quantity. Unlike the UK, there's really no restriction on how many applications you can put in. And I have seen people put in 20 or more. It's too many. You shouldn't be putting in that many applications. Also, you shouldn't just put in one application. Our fifth piece of advice is to do a very small number of extracurricular activities very well. One of the biggest mistakes that I made in high school was that I got involved with everything. I was on every single club because that's what I thought that universities wanted to see. But it's not. Universities want to see that you can do a few things very well. So I have 3 pieces of advice on this topic. The first is to look at supercurricular activities. These are activities that are going to be relevant to the career path you have in mind. So let's say, for instance, you know you want to be a scientist. Then it makes sense to do extracurricular activities that are science related. So for instance, you might be involved with a science fair, do a project for that. You might do a summer internship. Look at the APS jobs portal because there are always listings for those. You might also want to be involved with a science club at your high school or do science outreach. The second way in which you can optimize your extracurricular activities is to focus on leadership. You want to take a leading role in those activities, not just be a participant. And that brings me to the third and most important point, which is pick 1 or 2 things and do them very, very well. So for me, I did everything in high school. I did mock trial, I did journalism, I did speech and debate, I did academic decathlon, I was involved with Key Club, I did a ton of outreach. I was on everything and it was too much. It was way too much. And so when I went to community college, I then said to myself, what am I very good at and what do I enjoy doing? It was super clear to me. I like to debate. I am great at debating and I enjoy doing it.
Our 6th piece of advice relates to writing a good admissions essay, or personal statement as it's known in the UK. And the most crucial thing is to make sure that what you write is not cliches or generic. You'd be really surprised actually by how many people say, start their personal statements or their admissions essay with some cliched phrase or referencing Brian Greene's latest book. And it's great to be interested in these things, but you want to make sure that your personal statement stands out. Now, the way to do this is to focus on your own personal struggles that you've overcome to achieve the results you have and to why you'd be a great person to be at this university. Another thing is to focus on specific science-related things you have done because the admissions officers will be very interested in those. Another thing which is incredibly important is to make sure that you do your research, as we mentioned in the former tip, and look at the specific research that a university to which you're applying. Look at the research that they do. The reason this matters is that it'll be incredibly impressive if you can say, I want to go to this university because I really like their plasma research, for example. And that's incredibly impressive to have made those difference and will mean you stand out. The final thing is to make sure that you can justify everything you put in your personal statement. One of my biggest regrets on my own personal statement was to make a slightly overambitious claim about knowing about general relativity of all things, actually. And my interviewers, when they had my personal statement in front of them, immediately jumped on this and had a rather awkward aspect to the interview just because I was slightly struggling to answer their questions. So I really make sure that you can absolutely back up everything that you say on your personal statement.
The 7th piece of advice we have is to really consider looking for a mentor. This can be very useful, especially if you come from an underprivileged background. A mentor can really help organize your ideas for an essay or for your application, but also help organize your direction for your career. So you might be wondering, how do I even find a mentor? I'll give you a few ideas to get started. The first thing that I did, for instance, is I was in the Girl Scouts and I found it very useful because there are mentors within there. Yes, you can also go to your teachers at your high school because they should be able to give you a lot of great advice. Another thing to consider as well is the Big Sister Little Sister program. That might be a good option for you. Also, if your grades are sufficient, you might already be a member of the National Honor Society and they have a mentoring program there. Now let's say specifically that you know you want to be a physicist like me. There are a few different options as well. So for instance, check out the APS website. They have a mentoring program. Also, I recently found this website called Adopt a Physicist. Another important tip to remember is that it is always okay to email people and ask them to be your mentor, even people who you might think will never read your email. So for instance, I get emails all the time from young students who I don't know, who are all over the world, and as long as the email is readable, I will read it, and I will often reply to it within a few days.
Our final tip concerns getting good letters of recommendation. And the key here is to make sure that your letter of recommendation is genuine, not generic. Now, the way to make sure that you have a genuine letter of recommendation is to ask someone who knows you really well and who's also enigmatic, just because they will write something that they really believe and comes from the heart, and it'll really jump out compared to someone who doesn't know you so well or isn't so good at conveying why you're such a great person for this university. Another important thing which really matters is to help them to do that. You need to give them a lot of information. Give them your personal statement or admissions essay. Give them your grades. Tell them why you want to apply to this place. And then they can build up a coherent application and really make sure that their letter of recommendation complements every other aspect of your application. So those are all our tips. We really hope that you think they're helpful. If you've got any other pieces of advice, just leave them below in the comments and they'll be really appreciated.
Yeah, and if you found this kind of video really helpful, please subscribe to the channel and help support our content. So until next time, we'll see you later.